Wouldn't it be like the most petty, humiliating, yet startling thing if I just fired my hat at him?
Ron Howard was America's red-headed darling, the innocent boy on the Andy Griffith Show, who grew up in front of millions. But behind the charm of Mayberry's picket fences, he was hiding something. Not a scandal, not a secret, a grudge. Because while audiences saw warmth, laughter, and family on screen, Howard's real experience wasn't always so sunny. One co-star made his life on set quietly miserable. Someone he would never truly forgive. And the craziest part, that tension mirrored a deeper feud that tore apart the very heart of the show. You thought Mayberry was perfect? Ron Howard would tell you, it wasn't even close. The Illusion of Mayberry. For millions of Americans, the Andy Griffith Show wasn't just television, it was comfort. A gentle escape into a world where life moved slow, neighbors knew your name, and problems could be solved with a smile and a fishing pole. From 1960 to 1968, it painted Mayberry as a southern paradise untouched by the noise of the outside world. But that's exactly what it was, a painting. Beautiful, curated, and far from real. Behind the soothing drawl of Andy Taylor and the slapstick charm of Barney Fife, the reality of the set was far more complicated. Egos clashed, resentments brewed. The image of a close-knit cast laughing between takes, carefully crafted. And the small-town magic maintained not by harmony, but by silence. Ron Howard, who played Little Opie, was too young to understand all of it back then. But even he could sense that the smiles sometimes felt forced. There were conversations he wasn't part of, glances he didn't quite understand, and moments of tension that cut through the southern charm like a knife. The show was an undeniable success. Week after week, it dominated ratings, never dropping below 7th place in Nielsen rankings. It ended its final season at number 1, a rare feat, only matched by shows like I Love Lucy and Seinfeld. But behind that record-breaking legacy was a cast barely holding it together. The chemistry on screen might have been gold, but the dynamics behind the scenes, that was another story entirely. Young Ron Howard's rise, before he was a legendary director, before the Oscars, before Apollo 13 or A Beautiful Mind, Ron Howard was just a freckle-faced boy with a soft voice and serious eyes. A child born into showbiz, but destined to leave a much bigger mark than anyone expected. He came into the world on March 1, 1954, in Duncan, Oklahoma. His father, Vance Howard, was already walking the path of an actor and writer. His mother, Jean, had a background in theater too. For Ron, the spotlight wasn't a destination, it was home. By 5 years old, he was already appearing in films. Not just as a cute extra, but as a working actor, hitting his marks and delivering lines with a seriousness well beyond his years. His earliest roles came in projects like The Journey, Dennis the Menace, The Twilight Zone, and Dobie Gillis. He wasn't just getting jobs, he was getting noticed. Then came the moment that would define his early life. Opie Taylor. It wasn't just another role, it was the role. Cast as Andy Griffith's son on a show that would become a cultural landmark, Ron Howard entered living rooms across the country every week. His face instantly recognizable, his voice part of the national soundtrack. He was only 6 years old when the Andy Griffith Show premiered. And yet, from the first episode, he wasn't just the kid. He was a core part of Mayberry's magic. His innocence gave balance to Griffith's wisdom. His expressions made punchlines hit harder, and his moments of sadness, rare but powerful, reminded audiences that even in Mayberry, emotions ran deep. Behind the scenes though, life wasn't always storybook sweet. Howard later recalled one of his first days on set. He had to pretend a turtle was dead, a challenge for any child actor, let alone one still trying to understand how make-believe worked. But Griffith didn't lecture. He joked about it, kept things light, and gave Ron something more valuable than acting tips: comfort. That tone, kind, gentle, quietly humorous, would shape Ron Howard's entire career. You can see it in the warmth of his directing style even today. He learned it not in a classroom, but in the sleepy town of Mayberry, where not everything was as peaceful as it looked. Because while Ron was growing into a young star, the set around him was growing more divided. And some of those cracks? He felt them too, after Mayberry, from actor to director. When the Andy Griffith Show ended in 1968, Ron Howard was only 14, but he'd already lived a lifetime on set. Most child actors fade away after their moment in the spotlight. Not Ron. His story was just getting started. In 1974, he landed another defining role, Richie Cunningham, on Happy Days. A clean-cut, good-hearted teenager from the suburbs, Richie was the kind of role Ron could play in his sleep. But he never did. Every line felt real. Every look felt natural. His chemistry with co-stars, especially Henry Winkler's Fonzie, turned the show into a phenomenon. But while audiences laughed and cheered for Richie, Ron was starting to look elsewhere. Not for fame, not for attention, for control. He didn't just want to act. He wanted to tell stories, his way. While still working on Happy Days, he negotiated a deal with legendary producer Roger Corman. The agreement was simple. Ron would star in Corman's car chase comedy Eat My Dust if he could direct the next one. Corman agreed. The result? Grand Theft Auto, Howard's directorial debut. It wasn't a masterpiece, but it proved something important. Ron could lead behind the camera just as confidently as he had in front of it. And people noticed. In the early 1980s, he directed TV movies and smaller features, learning the ropes and honing his instincts. Then came Night Shift in 1982, a fast-paced comedy starring Michael Keaton, Shelley Long, and his old friend Henry Winkler. It wasn't just funny, it was smart, wild, and full of heart. And just like that, Howard had arrived, not as a former child actor, but as a real filmmaker. Then came Splash, a romantic fantasy about a man who falls in love with a mermaid. Might have sounded ridiculous on paper. But with Tom Hanks, Daryl Hannah, Eugene Levy, and John Candy, and with Ron's steady direction behind the scenes, it became a hit. The movie was heartfelt, funny, and visually striking. Audiences loved it. Critics loved it. Studios started paying attention. Ron Howard was no longer Opie. He was a director to watch. But while his career was on the rise, the past wasn't done with him. Because some memories, especially the difficult ones, have a way of lingering and coming back in unexpected ways. Set tensions and the feud. With Frances Bavier, the Andy Griffith Show may have looked like paradise on screen, but behind the scenes, the atmosphere wasn't always so sweet. Some of the deepest storylines never aired, because they were playing out in real life. At the center of one of the show's most unexpected feuds was Frances Bavier, the woman who played the warm-hearted Aunt Bee. Audiences adored her. She was the steady presence in the Taylor household, always ready with a home-cooked meal and gentle advice. But off-screen it was a very different story. Frances Bavier was a classically trained actress with a serious, no-nonsense attitude. She wasn't rude, she wasn't reckless, but she was reserved, painfully so. While Andy Griffith charmed everyone with his easygoing warmth, Bavier kept her distance, often staying in her dressing room between takes, keeping to herself and quietly resenting what she saw as frivolity. The tension between them didn't explode, it froze. Bavier expected professionalism, and when others brought a lighter, looser energy to set, she didn't approve. According to those who were there, even small requests, like asking her to move slightly for better camera framing, could trigger firm resistance. Howard Morris, who played Ernest T. Bass and directed several episodes, once described working with Bavier as walking through a minefield. You never knew what would set her off, but you always felt like something might. The disconnect between her and Andy Griffith was especially deep. Griffith, by all accounts, tried to extend kindness. He respected her talent. He knew how important she was to the show's tone. But Bavier wasn't interested in friendships. She saw herself as a professional actress, not part of a television family. As the show went on, that emotional divide only grew wider. The chemistry they created on screen, the loving bond between Aunt Bee and Sheriff Taylor, was pure performance. Behind the camera, the warmth just wasn't there. Griffith once tried to mend things years after the show had ended. He made a surprise visit to Bavier's home, hoping for a genuine face-to-face reconciliation. It didn't go well. She didn't slam the door. She didn't yell. But she made it clear the visit wasn't welcome. The same wall that existed on set was still standing, even decades later. For years, the feud remained mostly a rumor. Fans refused to believe that their beloved Aunt B might have been cold, distant, or hard to work with. But those who lived it knew. The cameras may have captured the illusion of harmony, but in the quiet spaces between takes, the tension was unmistakable, and no one felt it more than the youngest member of the cast, Ron Howard. Ron Howard's own experience with Aunt B. To the world, Aunt B was the sweetest woman on television. To Ron Howard, she was complicated. As a child actor, Ron wasn't looking to make enemies. He didn't understand backstage politics or personal egos. He just wanted to do his scenes, learn his lines, and maybe sneak a laugh between takes. But there was one cast member he couldn't quite reach, and one who never really tried to reach him. Frances Bavier, the woman who played Aunt B, never warmed to him. She wasn't outright cruel. She didn't yell or belittle him. But she kept her distance, not just physically, but emotionally. And for a little boy who spent most of his days pretending she was his loving aunt, that quiet rejection stung more than words ever could. Ron would later speak carefully about their dynamic, never trashing her, never dramatizing. But you could hear it in the pauses, in the way he talked around her name. She was difficult, cold, unreachable. One story that sticks with fans is the now iconic Pickle Story episode. On screen, it's hilarious. Aunt B makes terrible pickles. Opie and Andy secretly swap them out. It's lighthearted, funny, a classic sitcom setup. But behind the scenes, Ron was miserable. Why? He hated pickles. Absolutely hated them. And in that episode, he had to eat them, over and over, take after take, trying not to gag while keeping a smile on his face. It was already hard. But doing it opposite Bavier, who showed him no softness, no encouragement, made it worse. He didn't complain. He was a pro, even then. But years later, when he recalled that episode, you could tell it stayed with him. Not just the pickles, but the feeling of being alone on that set, acting out love that wasn't returned. Others noticed it too. Co-stars, crew members, they all saw the chill between Ron and Frances. It wasn't just a matter of age. It wasn't that she didn't like kids. It was something deeper. She kept people out, even a child who called her Aunt B on screen every single week. Ron learned something important in those moments. A lesson most actors don't learn until much later. Not everyone is what they seem. Just because someone plays warmth doesn't mean they carry it. Just because the audience believes it doesn't make it real. And while Ron never spoke with resentment, he didn't forget. That early experience shaped how he treated others on his own sets. And it planted a seed that would resurface years later, when another person he trusted revealed a very different side of himself. Legacy, loss, and quiet closure. Years passed. The cameras stopped rolling. Mayberry faded into reruns, and its stars went their separate ways. But the wounds left behind didn't disappear. They just got quieter. Frances Bavier retired from acting in 1972, slipping away from Hollywood and settling in Siler City, North Carolina, a real-life town not too different from the fictional Mayberry. She bought a modest home, surrounded herself with cats, and lived out her final years in solitude. Locals described her as private, distant, but polite. Some said she never stopped being Aunt B. Others weren't so sure. Her health began to decline in the late 1980s. She was diagnosed with multiple illnesses, including serious heart issues. And as her condition worsened, something inside her shifted. Regret. Maybe. Reflection. She made a phone call, one that no one expected. She called Andy Griffith. After years of silence, years of distance, she offered an apology, a real one. Griffith later recounted the moment with emotion. "I'm sorry we didn't get along better," she told him. "It was my fault." She admitted she'd been difficult. She acknowledged the role he played in the show's success. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, human, and long overdue. Frances Bavier died in 1989 at the age of 86. Her cause of death was never officially disclosed, but many believe it was tied to her ongoing heart complications. She passed away not in Hollywood, but in the calm stillness of Siler City, the town she had quietly chosen over fame. Andy Griffith lived for more than 2 more decades. He passed away in 2012, also at the age of 86, on Roanoke Island, North Carolina. According to his family, he was buried just hours after his death. A private farewell for a man who had once defined American television. Their feud never made headlines. Their conflict never went viral, but it stayed with those who knew the truth, and especially with Ron Howard. Because while he never spoke ill of Bavier, the distance between them never closed. Not fully. He respected her talent. He appreciated her performance, but he remembered the chill, and that memory would later resurface in the unlikeliest of places. Not on a film set, but in the world of politics. A different kind of betrayal. A new version of disappointment. And this time, it hit even harder. Ron and Cheryl. A rare love story in Hollywood. Not all of Ron Howard's memories from the spotlight are cold. Some are golden. In an industry built on short-lived romance and camera-ready chemistry, Ron and Cheryl Howard built something different, something real. Their story didn't start with headlines or a glamorous film set. It started like any other teenage romance, except this one never ended. They met when they were just 16. 2 kids in California with big dreams and quiet smiles. Ron was already famous. Cheryl was grounded, thoughtful, and entirely unimpressed by Hollywood glitz. That's what drew him in. She was different. Their first date was simple. A drive in Ron's mint green Volkswagen Beetle, a movie, and a shared pizza. No photographers, no red carpet, just 2 teenagers learning each other's rhythms. Years later, Ron still had that car, and still called it the beginning of everything that mattered. They married 5 years later, in June 1975. Cheryl didn't say yes immediately. In fact, it took 3 proposals. She wasn't hesitating out of fear. She just wanted to be sure. She had goals of her own. A future she wanted to shape before tying it to anyone else's, and Ron respected that. Together they raised 4 children, including Bryce Dallas Howard, a successful actress in her own right. But the Howards never chased the spotlight. They chased each other. Quietly. Steadily. For their 50th wedding anniversary in 2025, Ron shared a photo. No tuxedos. No gowns. Just the 2 of them standing on a beach at sunset. Wrinkles around their eyes. Content in their silence. He captioned it simply, "It's been a river ride, calm waters, tricky rapids. We just kept paddling." That's who they are. Not flashy. Not loud. But real. Ron once said the secret to their long marriage wasn't magic. It was respect. Listening. Letting each other grow. Adapting. And always, always coming back to the middle. In 2023, to celebrate their journey, Ron took Cheryl for a drive. Same mint green VW Bug. Same winding roads. Same 2 hearts, now older, wiser, and more deeply connected than ever. It's the kind of love Hollywood usually forgets. But Ron Howard never did. A beautiful mind and the burden of storytelling. By the early 2000s, Ron Howard had done something almost no other child star had managed. He'd reinvented himself. Not once, but twice. First as Richie Cunningham, then as a respected director with a voice of his own. And in 2001, that voice reached its loudest moment yet. A Beautiful Mind wasn't just a movie. It was a revelation. The story of mathematician John Nash. His brilliance and his battles with mental illness struck a nerve with audiences everywhere. It was tender, powerful, unforgettable. The cast was stacked. Russell Crowe, Jennifer Connelly, Ed Harris, Christopher Plummer. The script was sharp, the direction elegant, and the emotional weight undeniable. The awards came fast. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Supporting Actress, Best Adapted Screenplay. It was the kind of sweep directors dream about, and Howard had earned every bit of it. But success, especially in Hollywood, always comes with a shadow. Not long after the Oscars, the backlash began. Critics and some biographers started asking hard questions. Why had certain details about Nash's life been left out? What about his illegitimate child? His troubled behavior during younger years? His absence as a father? To some, Howard had softened the truth, made the story too tidy, too inspirational. Howard didn't deny it. He acknowledged the omissions. But his reasoning was clear. He wasn't making a documentary. He was telling an emotional truth, one that captured the core of who Nash was, not just what he did. Still, it stung, especially when people began attacking Nash himself, using the film's popularity as a weapon to criticize the real man behind it. That's when it hit Ron hardest. Because for all his love of storytelling, he never wanted to hurt anyone. Not the subjects, not the audience, especially not the quiet genius at the center of it all. He had told a story to uplift, not to distort. But in doing so, he learned something every great storyteller eventually must face. Telling someone's story, especially a complicated one, is a burden. You're not just crafting scenes, you're shaping how the world remembers them. And that responsibility? It's heavier than any award. Ron Howard carried that weight quietly. He didn't lash out at critics, he didn't argue online, but he remembered how it felt to put your heart into a story, only to be accused of rewriting someone else's truth. It wouldn't be the last time that feeling came knocking. J.D. Vance and a modern disappointment. In 2020, Ron Howard took on another real-life story, one he approached with care, compassion, and the same sense of emotional truth that shaped a beautiful mind. This time, it was Hillbilly Elegy, a film based on the best-selling memoir by J.D. Vance. It was personal, raw, a story of poverty, resilience, addiction, and family. Howard didn't make the film to score headlines or awards. He made it because he believed in the power of stories that show people struggling and surviving. Vance's memoir felt like a window into forgotten parts of America, and Ron saw humanity in that. At the time, Vance wasn't a politician. He wasn't delivering speeches or making headlines. He was just a man telling his story. And Ron, ever the listener, wanted to help him tell it well. But something changed. Not long after the film's release, J.D. Vance shifted. Not slightly. Completely. He entered politics. Then he ran for Senate. Suddenly, the man who had written about compassion and pain was using a very different tone. One full of harsh rhetoric, culture war attacks, and lines that stunned even his former allies. Howard, never one for public drama, didn't explode. He didn't go on TV. But when asked about it, his disappointment was clear. He said he'd barely recognized the man Vance had become. The values that drew him to Hillbilly Elegy, honesty, humility, grit, had been replaced by something else entirely. And Ron couldn't stay silent forever. Without naming names or firing shots, he made his feelings known. This wasn't the story he thought he was helping tell. And it certainly wasn't the person he thought he'd been working with. For Ron, it wasn't about politics. It was about trust. It was about empathy. It was about telling someone's story with your whole heart, only to watch them become a version of themselves that undermines everything you tried to uplift. It was the same sting he'd felt decades earlier. The same chill that ran through him every time he looked across the set and saw Aunt be kind on screen, distant in real life. He had learned early that not everyone who plays warmth truly has it, that some people wear masks, and others rewrite their own stories the moment the cameras stop rolling. J.D. Vance was supposed to be a voice for the broken. Instead, to Howard, he became a reminder of just how fast a narrative can shift and how easily trust can be lost. What Ron Howard learned about people. Ron Howard has spent nearly his entire life telling stories. Stories that make us laugh. Stories that make us cry. Stories that make us feel something real. But perhaps the hardest stories he's had to live were the ones behind the camera. As a child, he learned that someone who plays love can carry coldness behind their eyes. As a director, he learned that telling someone else's truth means shouldering every consequence of how that truth is received. And as a man, watching J.D. Vance rise to power on rhetoric that contradicted everything Hillbilly Elegy once stood for, he learned a final, painful lesson. Not everyone you try to understand is worth understanding. Ron never named names. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than outrage ever could. Because he's not just a director. He's an observer. A listener. The kind of person who sees what others miss and says something only when it truly matters. And when he does speak, people listen. In recent interviews, when asked about his disappointment, he didn't vent. He simply reminded audiences of what's at stake. The stories we believe, he said, shape the headlines we wake up to tomorrow. That wasn't just a quote, it was a warning. Because if there's anyone who understands how easily a character can fool an audience, it's Ron Howard. He's seen it happen on screen. He's seen it on set. And now, he's seen it on the national stage. So what did Ron Howard learn after a lifetime in the spotlight? That smiles can lie. That stories can spin. That sometimes the person you admire becomes someone you no longer recognize. But also that forgiveness is possible. That love can last. That silence can be powerful. And that truth, real, human truth, still matters. From Aunt Bee's cold shoulder, to Oscar stage triumphs, to a rising politician who left him stunned, Ron Howard learned what most people never do. The most important stories aren't the ones we direct. They're the ones we survive. Ron Howard never needed drama to make noise. He let his work speak. He let his silence speak louder. And when the masks finally came off on set or in politics, he knew exactly what to do. Observe, learn, and move forward with grace. If this story gave you a new perspective on Ron Howard or the people behind the faces we thought we knew, let us know in the comments below. And before you go, hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the next video on your screen, because the stories Hollywood hides, we're just getting started.